What's up everybody, my name is Brendan and this is BigBearB Creative. Welcome back everybody to another Friday how-to video. It's been about a week since the last video. It's actually been exactly a week because we didn't do a video on Sunday, and that was because I had some things planned out that we were going to do. They ended up not happening, and I'll tell you a little bit about that on this Sunday's video because I have a special idea for that one planned out. Basically for that, we're just going to take a couple of home items, I guess you would call them, and we're going to turn it into a landscape photo. So I guess you could call it a studio landscape video that we're going to do on Sunday. So if that sounds interesting to you, make sure you subscribe so that you can stick around so you get updated when that video comes out. But as you saw in this video, today we're talking about the basics of photography. We're talking about one of the main pillars, one of the three pillars of photography, and that is aperture. Because aperture can be put as simply as how much light you're letting into your camera. And photography is the art of capturing light. So you could say it might be a little important. Just a little bit though. Not that much. It's the bottom third, but it's actually very important. But the other two pillars, obviously because they said there's three, but the other two main pillars are your shutter speed and your ISO. And using those three, if you master those three, you've mastered your camera in the manual mode, which is very important if you want to become a professional photographer. So if you're a beginner photographer and you really want to start mastering your camera, this is going to be a great tutorial for you to watch. So stay tuned until the very end because there's a lot of information to cover. So first off, let's start with what does aperture look like, where can you find it on your camera, and what apertures are available to you. So basically your aperture, you could find it on your live view, on your LCD screen, you could even find it through your viewfinder, the little top one you put your eye up to in the back. It's going to be available in all of those. And you're going to find it as either a F number or an F/ number. So on my camera it's a Nikon, it's going to be very similar for a lot of Nikons. You can see it in the top middle. In this example it's going to be F5.6, which is actually what I'm shooting this video on. Don't mind the other settings, that's not what I'm shooting this video on with those. I can do a whole tutorial about different settings for videos, but that F5.6, that's going to be your representation of what your aperture is. Now, like I said, you can find that as either the F5.6 or F/5.6. So now you know where it is on your camera. Let's talk about what your options are when it comes to what apertures you can use. And that all comes down to what lens you're using, because different lenses are going to allow you to have different maximums for apertures. Now when we say maximum, that's basically how wide your aperture can be, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But you can find what apertures are going to be available for you on the actual lens that you're using. So using my telephoto lens, is my biggest lens that I have. It's a AFS Nikkor 55 to 200 millimeter 4-5.6 G2 ED. So right after that 55 to 200 millimeter, that's going to be your aperture that's available to you. And it's going to be the same on all lenses. So for my telephoto lens, that's the 4 to 5.6. So that means that at the widest focal range that this lens goes to, which is the 55, I could shoot at an f4. Now at the most zoomed in I could go, which is the 200, the widest aperture I could have is a 5.6. Now all apertures are going to go well past that. Most cameras are going to go to around f32 and even a little bit past that now because technology's gone so far, but we'll talk a little bit about those super narrow lenses at the end and why you should kind of stay away from them. So now that you know where you can find it, which ones are available for you, let's talk about the specifics of aperture, how it affects your photos. There's going to be two different ways. Plus we're also going to talk about which apertures are best for what kind of applications, and also things you really want to look out for that'll ruin your photo if you don't use the proper apertures or you just cranked it a little too far, like what we were saying earlier with a 32. So let's jump on in with the what is aperture and how it is going to affect your photos in those two different ways. So as we said earlier, aperture is basically how much light we're letting into the camera. Now the physical representation of aperture on lenses, you can find it on the very back of the lens if you're looking in. There's going to be blades that kind of all swoop together until they make a circle, basically. And that gap, I guess is the best way to say it, the gap in that circle is basically what your aperture is. Like we said, apertures are represented by these numbers. And obviously a very clear statement to make here is the aperture is going to affect the brightness of your photo because aperture is how much light you're letting into your photo. But it's important to know what the numbers mean in terms of how much light it's going to bring in. And I'll just give you a pre-warning here. Some things in photography are a little confusing because they're going to be the opposite of what you think they actually are going to be. So when we're talking about aperture, there's going to be F really small to F fairly big. So when it comes to aperture and light, the wider your aperture is, which means the bigger that gap for the whole thing, the blades in the back, the bigger that gap is, the more light that's going to be going into your camera. That's called a wide aperture. And brightness in terms of photography is called exposure. So if you hear me refer to exposure, I'm talking about brightness. So the wider it is, the more bright your photo is going to be, the more exposed your photo is going to be. Vice versa, the smaller that hole, the less light you're bringing in, the less exposed your photo is going to be. Now, you would think here, bigger aperture, bigger number. Like we said, photography is a little confusing. It's actually the smaller the number, the wider the gap, the wider the aperture, the more light you're bringing in. The narrower the gap, the bigger the number, and the less light you're bringing in. So it can be a little confusing at times, but just remember, smaller number, wider aperture, more light. And then the opposite is going to be the bigger the number, the narrower the aperture, and the less light. So that's basically how aperture is going to affect your brightness of your photo. And I'll give you a great example here showing you an f3.5 versus an f11 that's taken with the same settings just besides the aperture. Now, as we can see there, the f3.5 is much brighter than the f11. Now, all the other settings are the same, focus set at the same point, and you might have tell a little thing different there that we're going to talk about next with the f11 versus the f3.5, besides just the brightness. And if you didn't catch it, I'm going to explain it to you next, so hopefully you'll be able to see that. So you could even go back after I explain it to you and let me know down in the comment section if you could see the difference with this. But so that's basically the main difference you're going to get with exposure just using aperture. Now, what about that next thing? What about that other thing that aperture is going to change? It's not just your exposure. That's going to be your depth of field. And depth of field is a fancy term that basically just means area that can be in focus. Now, of course, you actually have to set your focus correctly, and I have a whole video explaining about focus and all that kind of stuff. So if you guys want to watch that, make sure you check it out. I'll link it in the card in one of these corners. I think it's this corner. I think it's this corner. Check it out. But basically depth of field is going to be how much of your composition is in focus. And again, it's going to be a little bit confusing, but also not really, because I'll give you a little hint for this. So you know how I was saying before that the smaller the number, the wider the aperture, and the wider, not the wider, but the brighter that your photo is going to be? Well, when it comes to depth of field, the smaller the number, the wider the aperture, the narrower amount that's going to be in focus, or the less amount that's going to be in focus. So just remember, smaller number, smaller amount of focal range, or what's in focus. And then again, the opposite of that is going to be that the bigger the number, the narrower the aperture, much more in focus. So I'll show you a quick example here of a photo I took of the trunk in my office that's really going to show the big difference between my dog's howling now because an ambulance went by. One second. Okay. Okay. They're stopped howling now. But yeah, so basically, like I was saying, one is going to be an f3.5 and then the other is going to be an f8. And you're really going to see a big difference of what is in focus just looking at the grain pattern on that chest itself. So that's how big of a difference you could get from just changing your aperture. One, it's going to make the photo brighter, can make it darker. You're going to have not much that's in that depth of field, or you could have a lot that's going to be in that depth of field, which basically, like I said, is just going to be how much is in actual focus versus what's being blurred out. Which leads me into what is good for what. So when it comes to apertures, there's going to be your aperture zones. And there's like we've been talking about this whole time, you've heard me referring to them as wide apertures and narrow apertures. So for those wide apertures, you're basically going to be looking at f1.4 to f3.5. There also might be some, because technology is ever changing, there's going to be even less than f1.4, and basically that's just going to mean you're going to have even narrower depth of field. So it's going to start decreasing this way. So that's basically what you're going to get with the different kinds of apertures. So those wide apertures, f1.4 to f3.5, those are going to give you a very short, narrow depth of field, which is really going to be good for those portrait photographers, product photographers, anything that you really want to separate or isolate a subject in your composition. So what could be me in focus here, my hand here, how it's in focus, that's because I'm using something that's in between the narrow and wide. This is going to be a little bit in focus, more than what it would be for the wide. So this is focused and wide, this would not be focused. This would be blurred, back here would be blurred. Everything besides your actual subject is going to be blurred. So if that's the kind of thing you're looking for, also if you love the whole bokeh looking photos, we have the lights that aren't at all sharp and they're just random color burst, you're going to need that. Now if you're shooting landscape, you're going to want that narrow aperture, which is going to be an f8 to f16. And those are going to let you get everything from the far background, the sky, up to the closest thing in front of your camera. That's going to be sharp. Now, you might have to do a couple things there, because if things are too close to the camera, there's no way it could be sharp just because of your lens. In that case, you'll have to do a focus stack, but for the most part, if you plan your composition correctly, everything is going to be sharp. So that's what you're going to want to use if you're shooting more of a landscape, or if you just like shooting just anything that's going to be everything in focus. Of course, it's art, so you can kind of do whatever you want. If you're out in the field and you see a beautiful tree, you could isolate that with a wide aperture. It's all up to you, but typically those are going to be the things that you're looking for. But what about those apertures in between? That's going to be an f4 to f7.1, and those are going to be your middle ground. You can kind of lean a little bit both ways, so if you're shooting more of like an f4, that's going to be a little bit more that's going to be in that focal range, but you're also going to have not everything as sharp, and you're also going to have a little bit of a brighter photo. If you're shooting that f7.1, you're going to have more in that focal range, that depth of field, but it's going to be a little bit darker. Now the key one in this grouping is that f5.6. We've been using it, I used it in this photo, I showed you the example earlier. That's a very highly common one because it's a great compromise of both the large area in focus as well as the brighter photo. But now we're going to talk about those ones past f16 that I was warning you about at the beginning of this video. Because when you go too far down the narrow to those super narrow apertures, there's some bad things that can happen. So basically there's two different things. That's going to be diffraction and aberrations. I'm pretty sure I said that right. Pretty sure. But basically diffraction is that little hole, the actual aperture that the light is going through is so narrow that the individual light rays are actually interacting and interfering with each other. And it's basically just going to make your photo lose sharpness, make it look a little blurry. And I'm going to show you a great example of this with those little fighting things. They're kind of like Rock'em Sock'em robots, but instead they have a shield and a warhammer. It's a little toy that's on my desk. I basically use it whenever Final Cut Pro is frustrating me and my computer is just being slow. But yeah, so I'll show you an example here. Here we're going to see that f32 is going to be a lot less sharp. It's going to look a little bit blurry, a little bit out of focus compared to that f5.6 that is actually really sharp. Again, all the other settings are going to be the same, but you can really tell the big difference of quality. Because when you end up going past f16, you're actually going to start losing a little bit of quality. Now for certain things that won't matter, and this is why I suggest not using anything past f16 while you're still learning, while you're that beginner photographer, until you've mastered just aperture in general, and then you can start playing with it once you've got a couple tricks up your sleeves and how you can mess with things that have to do with a lot with exposure blending and stuff like that, just so you're not losing that quality. Because while it might not look bad for a normal photograph that you're not like zooming in or pixel peeping, whenever you print it in a large format, it's not going to look good. You're going to lose quality, and that's not something you want to put out to any sort of potential customers or anything like that. So you're going to want to stick under f16. Like I said, with those higher ones, a lot of the more commonly used super narrow apertures are going to be f22 and f32. And really you're just going to use those if the sky is overexposing your photograph. There's too much light's coming in for what you're looking for, but you need to find a different way to handle it besides going past that. A great way to do that would be ND filters that are basically just sunglasses that you put onto your lens so it stops down the exposure, which makes it proper exposure. Because if you're not using that and you do crank it, like I said, we're going to get those diffractions and we're going to get those aberrations, which basically those are, again, when that hole, your aperture, is too narrow, that not only is the light interfering with each other, you're actually bending the light rays, which causes a bunch of different things like photo distortion. It's going to start to curve the horizon line. You're going to get a vignette, which there's a lot of people put a lot on photos, but sometimes it could be a bad thing. There's a bunch of more aberrations too that are just not going to be good for your photos. So you just really want to stick away from using those really super narrow apertures. Anything past f16, just go ahead and stop. Now with those ND filters, if you do really need to stop down your photo that much that the f16 is still too bright, one, you can mess with your shutter speed and your ISO, but if those are set exactly where you need it for the photo that you need and you just have to stop it down, use the ND filters. They are going to be expensive, but the high quality ones are really going to save you, because you end up going to have those aberrations and distortions if you buy cheap ND filters. So just go ahead and buy the expensive ones. Even you can just buy one that's a variable ND filter. It'll save you a little bit, but that's really, you should use that instead of stopping down so much with your apertures to those super narrow, because it's going to start messing up your images and you're going to think you're doing everything wrong, because your photos aren't going to look sharp, they're going to look blurry, and you're not doing anything wrong besides just the camera can't handle what it is you're trying to make it do. Eventually we'll get past this, and lenses are always constantly coming out with new technology and stuff like that, but for right now, that's the things you have to worry about. So just stick below f16. So we've talked about a lot here. So we're going to go through a quick little reminder. Remember the f1.4 to f3.5. Wide apertures. That's going to be more light, less in focus. Aperture of f8 to f16, those are your narrow apertures, which is going to mean the smaller the hole, which means less light coming in. However, you're going to have a lot more in focus. So if you're wanting to shoot more of a landscape, f8 to f16. If you want to shoot more of portraits, stuff like that, f1.4 to 3.5. And again, you can find that all the different apertures that are available to you are going to be on your lens. It's going to show you the maximum and the minimum that you could go down to, which is the bigger numbers. It's really, you're not going to have a hard time. You're definitely going to get to f16 and you don't really need to get past that. So stick to those. Now for f4 to f7.1, those are great middle grounds. However, if you are going to shoot a middle ground, I would suggest using f5.6, because that's just a great compromise for what you're looking for. So if you guys have learned anything, let me know down in the comment section whether something you didn't know before that you learned now, or if you want anything more explained. I would love to help explain these things to you. You could also message me on any of my social medias and I'd love to help you there. If you have questions about your photos or anything, if it was a proper aperture to use for this kind of thing or anything like that, you go ahead and tag me in them. I would love to discuss you guys' photos with you. So let me know down there what you guys think, or like I said, over on my social media. And also make sure that you're smashing that like button, or not really smashing, bear paw it, because I love bears. Bear paw that like button. Let me know that you guys are really enjoying these videos and that you're learning something here. So one, it just helps me know that you are enjoying these and that I should keep making more. It's also going to help promote it to other people who would love to learn this information as well. Also make sure you are subscribing, because we do these how-to videos every Friday, and then Sunday we do photo editing. This Sunday will be slightly different. I'm going to actually show you the process of me taking this photo, and then we're going to edit it and just kind of see what we could get with a studio landscape photo. So I think that should be fun. So make sure you guys are checking that out. Also check out some of the other information down in the description box. Like, it's going to be music I used in this video. It's going to be some really good links, including gear that I use if you guys are looking for photography gear. It's going to be merch that I sell. There's going to be photo prints you can buy. There's a bunch of fun stuff. So make sure you guys are checking that out down below. Thank you for watching this video. Hope you guys are having a great day. Be safe during this time and go be creative.